The last human who remembered rain would die quietly. No instrument would detect the moment, and no alarm would sound through the corridors. Somewhere aboard the ship, an old woman might close her eyes while carrying the final living memory of water falling from an open sky. She would remember the coolness on her face, the smell rising from warm soil, the trembling silver surface of a river beneath a storm. Her grandchildren would understand the meaning of every word. They would have watched recordings of rain and studied the machinery of weather. Yet the sensation itself would leave the human world with her. Earth would continue to exist in photographs, maps, films, preserved seeds, genetic libraries, and histories extending across thousands of years. Children would know the names of oceans they had never touched and mountain ranges they could never climb. They might recognize the outline of every continent while finding the idea of a horizon almost impossible to imagine. Their world would possess ceilings, measured air, illuminated gardens, and corridors curving back toward themselves. Beyond the hull, distance would stretch without a boundary the eye could perceive. Earth would remain visible inside their education, while its physical reality faded further into the ancestral past. After centuries in space, forgetting Earth would rarely mean losing its name. The deeper loss would occur inside language, instinct, emotion, and daily expectation. A person can know that an ancient place existed without feeling any connection to its mornings. A society can preserve a perfect archive while allowing the meaning of that archive to change. The descendants aboard the ship would inherit an origin, a mission, and a collection of memories shaped by people long dead. Each generation would decide how much attention those memories deserved. Gradually, the birthplace of humanity could become a sacred world, a historical curiosity, a political weapon, or a story so old that even believers would struggle to imagine it as real. At the beginning of the voyage, Earth would occupy almost every conversation. The departing passengers would remember watching the planet withdraw beneath them, first as a vast landscape, then as a curved world, and eventually as a point of light hidden among other lights. They would carry memories dense with ordinary detail. Their Earth would contain railway platforms, crowded pavements, barking dogs, overheated rooms, private gardens, traffic signals, winter coats, and the changing smell of cities after sunset. Grand visions of oceans and continents would share space with trivial recollections. A particular doorway, a broken cup, a neighbor's voice, the texture of an old kitchen table. The first passengers would also remember why they left. Some might have departed during an age of prosperity, chosen to establish humanity around another star. Others might have escaped a world under pressure from environmental decline, political violence, or approaching astronomical danger. Every possibility would produce a different emotional inheritance. A confident mission would fill its first generation with pride, ceremony, and a sense of historical importance. A desperate evacuation would carry grief and unresolved guilt. Survivors might wonder why they had been selected, why billions had remained behind, and whether the journey represented courage, privilege, abandonment, or all three woven together. For these travelers, the ship would remain a vessel throughout their lives. Even after decades, its gardens would evoke gardens elsewhere. Its public halls would be compared with theaters, temples, schools, and stations on Earth. Artificial morning would follow a programmed schedule, while the passengers remembered dawn arriving through atmosphere and cloud. Their bodies would continue to anticipate seasons, even where seasons existed only through changes in lighting, temperature, and ceremonial routine. The architecture around them would carry the emotional quality of a temporary place, although everyone knew that their bones would remain aboard after death. Children born during the first decades would absorb Earth through the intensity of their parents' recollections. Bedtime stories would include real places described with such precision that imagination could almost turn them into memories. A father might describe waves advancing across a beach, repeating the sound until his child learned to imitate it. A mother could explain the first cold morning of winter, when breath appeared before the face and frost-covered windows overnight. These accounts would give Earth emotional weight. The children would sense that the adults came from a realm larger, wilder, and less controlled than the one surrounding them. Those children would also notice contradictions. One passenger would remember Earth as beautiful and generous. Another would describe hunger, pollution, war, or persecution. Some would speak of departure with sorrow. Others would recall the launch as liberation. The inherited planet would already contain several versions of itself, each supported by authentic experience. The shipborne generation would have no direct method for deciding which emotional truth deserved authority. Earth would enter their minds as a landscape formed from many testimonies, shaped by love, resentment, nostalgia, fear, and the selective habits of human memory. The first generation born aboard would begin life without any sense of confinement. The walls would surround them from birth, and their earliest movements would teach them the geometry of corridors, ladders, sealed doors, and rotating habitats. A child learns the dimensions of reality through repeated contact. Ceilings become natural when every room has one. Mechanical ventilation becomes silence when it has never stopped. The distant vibration of pumps, bearings, fans, and circulating water becomes part of the body's understanding of safety. A sudden absence of machinery might frighten them more deeply than a violent storm once frightened children on Earth. Their parents could describe an open sky, although language would provide only an approximation. The shipborne child might picture a ceiling placed very high above the ground, colored blue and decorated with clouds. The concept of endless visibility would strain against a lifetime of enclosed spaces. Even large habitat cylinders would curve overhead, bringing distant fields and buildings back into view. Every landscape aboard would reveal its construction. Access panels, sensors, maintenance paths, and structural supports would remain close enough to remind the inhabitants that their environment depended upon constant attention. The meaning of outside would change first. For the departing generation, outside had once meant streets, fields, gardens, mountains, and the immense shared air of a planet. Aboard the ship, outside would mean vacuum, radiation, darkness, and immediate death. Children would learn that the hull divided existence into two domains, the inhabited interior and everything else. The word could acquire an undertone of danger that Earthborn adults never fully shared. An instruction to go outside would become absurd unless it referred to a protected maintenance operation conducted through an airlock and within a suit. The ship's oldest passengers might continue using expressions born from planetary life. They would speak of sunrise, although the nearest star had become a bright point behind shielding. They would say that someone had their head in the clouds, that trouble was coming over the horizon, or that a rumor had spread like wildfire. Their children would learn these expressions through context while losing contact with the experiences that created them. Language would preserve small fossils of Earth, carrying ancient weather, animals, landscapes, and forms of movement inside phrases whose original images grew steadily dimmer. Aboard the vessel, safety would depend upon understanding the environment as a system. Children would learn early that water moved through cycles of use, purification, storage, and redistribution. Air passed through leaves, filters, chambers, and lungs. Food emerged from carefully balanced relationships among light, minerals, microorganisms, cultivated plants, and human labor. Waste would have destinations and values. Every object placed into the wrong channel could create consequences elsewhere. This education would shape a culture whose members saw survival as a visible network of exchanges, monitored throughout every hour of their lives. By the third or fourth generation, living memory of Earth would begin to disappear. Grandparents might still repeat stories inherited directly from the founders, yet the chain would contain several acts of retelling. Details would shift gently. A childhood garden could become larger with each generation. A difficult winter might acquire storms that never occurred. A journey across an ocean could become a family epic, polished through repetition until its uncertainty vanished. The people telling these stories would act in good faith. Human memory has always been a form of reconstruction, and inherited memory would pass through additional layers of interpretation. Some stories would survive because they contained strong emotions. The account of the final launch might remain vivid for centuries, especially when attached to a family whose ancestor played an important role. Other memories would fade through their very ordinariness. Few descendants would preserve exact descriptions of supermarket aisles, office lifts, suburban intersections, or the smell inside an old car. These mundane environments once formed most of human experience, yet they would appear too trivial for formal preservation. Over time, the remembered Earth would become increasingly dramatic, filled with storms, forests, oceans, celebrations, disasters, and farewell scenes. The loss of ordinary Earth would alter how descendants understood their ancestors. Archived films might show people sitting in parks, walking through rain, or opening windows without concern. Such actions could appear careless to a population trained to protect every liter of water and every controlled exchange of air. A shipborne viewer might watch a person leave a light burning in an empty room and feel immediate discomfort. Scenes of discarded food could provoke anger. Images of vast lawns maintained for appearance, fountains spilling clean water into ornamental basins, and vehicles transporting one person across a city could seem almost indecent. Earth's abundance would become difficult to separate from Earth's waste. The ancestral world contained rivers large enough to cross countries and an atmosphere extending around the whole planet. It also contained communities that lacked safe water and cities where air became dangerous to breathe. Descendants raised within a closed system might struggle to understand how both realities existed together. Their historians would explain economics, geography, power, and political failure. Even a complete explanation might leave the emotional mystery intact. The ship's culture would treat basic resources as parts of a shared biological trust, guarded with solemn discipline. The founders might have expected their descendants to revere Earth. Reverence alone would never guarantee understanding. Sacred objects often accumulate meanings that their creators never intended. A globe placed in the central hall could begin as an educational model, become a memorial after the founders died, and eventually serve as the center of annual ceremonies. Children might touch the blue surface while reciting the names of the first crew. Centuries later, the ceremony could survive after the historical reasons for each gesture had become uncertain. Earth would remain present through ritual, though ritual would transform the planet into a symbol. Language would change aboard the ship even under careful supervision. Every generation adjusts pronunciation, rhythm, vocabulary, and grammar. New conditions create new distinctions, while unused distinctions weaken. The founders might possess dozens of common words related to rain, drizzle, shower, downpour, mist, sleet, hail, storm. Their descendants would encounter water and irrigation lines, drinking systems, sanitation units, storage tanks, laboratories, and ceremonial simulations. Their language would become precise around pressure, purity, recycling stages, microbial balance, and leakage. Weather terms would survive mainly through literature and historical education. The word world could undergo a similar transformation. For Earth-born passengers, a world meant a planet, immense and naturally formed. Ship-born children might use the same word for the vessel itself. Their world would contain homes, schools, farms, hospitals, workshops, public spaces, and a population extending across every known family. The hull would mark the boundary of human geography. Saying the whole world is asleep could refer quite literally to everyone aboard. The linguistic change would reflect daily experience, and adults devoted to preserving Earth's vocabulary would find it difficult to prevent. Directions would also evolve. North, south, east, and west might remain useful in virtual maps or rotating habitats designed with conventional orientation. Daily movement could favor terms linked to the ship's structure: forward, aft, axial, rimward, inward, spinward, counterspinward. Children would learn these directions through the body, just as planetary populations once learned uphill, downstream, inland, or toward the coast. A person's accent might reveal the habitat ring in which they grew up. Technical terminology could enter ordinary speech until the ship's engineering became embedded in jokes, insults, poetry, and expressions of affection. Names would carry traces of the vanished planet. Children might be called Terra, Marina, Dawn, River, Atlas, or names belonging to regions their families once inhabited. Over centuries, the origin of those names could lose clarity. A girl named Savannah might know that her name referred to a grassland, although no living person had seen one. Families could preserve surnames linked to ancient trades, landscapes, animals, or villages. Each name would function as a tiny archive, frequently spoken and rarely examined, maintaining fragments of Earth within the identity of people who had never approached it. Recorded language would slow certain forms of change. Descendants could hear the founders speak in perfectly preserved interviews. They could study the original mission documents and compare their own speech with voices from departure day. The existence of recordings would create an unusual relationship between old and modern language. Ancient pronunciation would remain audible, though daily speech would continue its natural movement. Actors might learn the founder accent for historical dramas. Religious or civic ceremonies could preserve entire passages in an archaic form, recited faithfully by people who found ordinary conversation in that dialect unnatural. Education would become the main defense against cultural amnesia. Every child could receive years of instruction about Earth's geology, biology, history, climate, nations, languages, and artistic traditions. Virtual environments might allow students to walk through accurate reconstructions of vanished cities, dive across coral reefs, cross deserts, and stand beneath simulated storms. The archive could contain more information than any individual on Earth had once been able to access. From a technical perspective, descendants might know their ancestral planet with extraordinary precision. Knowledge acquired through education occupies a different place from knowledge acquired through life. A student may memorize the dimensions of an ocean without understanding how it changes the air along a coast. A simulated forest can reproduce light, sound, moisture, insects, and the movement of leaves, while the visitor remains aware of the chamber walls and the scheduled end of the experience. The simulation would teach, astonish, and perhaps move them deeply. Its forests would always remain safe enough for students, designed by people who selected which qualities deserved inclusion. The curriculum would soon become political. Space aboard a generation ship would be limited, and attention would be even more limited. Teaching 10,000 years of human history requires selection. Educators would decide which civilizations, conflicts, inventions, religions, works of art, and environmental failures received time. The original mission planners might establish a vast program, believing that the essentials of Earth could be defined in advance. Later teachers would face new emergencies, new knowledge, and the growing history of the ship itself. Each century would add material that future children needed to understand. Eventually, the history of the vessel could occupy more classroom hours than the history of Earth. Students would need to learn about reactor repairs, constitutional crises, crop failures, medical discoveries, population agreements, structural modifications, and the lives of major figures born during the voyage. These events would influence their institutions and explain the world around them. Earth history would remain foundational, yet its practical relevance might seem increasingly remote. A dispute that occurred aboard 80 years earlier could shape current law more directly than an empire that fell thousands of years before launch. Teachers would carry the burden of making Earth emotionally credible. Facts alone would provide little protection against indifference. A gifted teacher might describe the migration of birds across continents, the slow growth of ancient trees, the pressure of deep oceans, and the mingling of human languages in large cities. Another might bring students into a humid chamber and release the scent of soil after rain. Education could create longing for a place no student had seen. It could also create fatigue if every generation felt obliged to mourn a world whose importance had become an inherited command. The ship's designers might devote entire chambers to preserving sensory memories of Earth. One room could reproduce a coastline through salt water, wind, projected distance, and the rhythmic movement of waves. Another could simulate woodland, with living trees growing beneath engineered light and hidden systems generating birdsong. There might be a cold chamber where frost formed on stone, a tropical garden heavy with moisture, and a dark observatory that projected the constellations as they appeared from the solar system during the year of departure. These environments would become precious because they required energy, maintenance, water, and physical space. Access could be scheduled, Children might visit the ocean chamber once a year and prepare for the experience as though entering a sacred site. The water would probably form a modest pool compared with a natural sea, yet the recorded horizon could extend around the walls. Waves would arrive with programmed irregularity. Salt would cling to the skin. Some visitors might weep upon seeing the illusion, moved by a homesickness inherited from people they had never met. Others could find the simulations disturbing. The openness of a projected landscape might trigger unease in people accustomed to visible boundaries. Wind moving unpredictably across the body could feel invasive. The sound of thunder might activate emergency instincts, since deep vibrations aboard the ship usually indicated mechanical trouble. A person raised among carefully moderated temperatures could experience natural heat or cold as an assault. The ancestral environment would be presented as beautiful, while the bodies and expectations of the visitors had been shaped by very different surroundings. Over time, the simulations would evolve. Technicians would improve their realism, repair lost components, and adapt them to changing cultural tastes. A forest designed during the 1st century might reproduce the founder generation's idea of a peaceful woodland. Later artists could add creatures, weather patterns, and ecological complexity drawn from archival data. Every modification would introduce interpretation. The simulated Earth would become a collaborative artwork extending across centuries, assembled from records and revised by people without direct experience of the original. At some point, descendants might prefer environments native to the ship. They could create gardens shaped by rotating gravity, luminous chambers filled with engineered organisms, and vast axial spaces where water floated in controlled forms. Art would explore reflections, curvature, mechanical rhythm, and the darkness between stars. Earth simulations would retain historical importance, though they would share attention with landscapes developed by the traveling culture itself. The vessel would cease to imitate a planet in every aesthetic choice. Its inhabitants would discover beauty within the conditions that formed their own lives. Religion and mythology would offer Earth another path through time. Many existing faiths carry sacred geographies tied to rivers, mountains, cities, deserts, and directions on the planet. A community traveling between stars would have to interpret traditions created beneath an earthly sky. Prayer times once connected to sunrise and sunset might follow the ship's artificial cycle. Pilgrimage could become symbolic, virtual, or centered upon objects carried from holy places. Water, soil, stones, wood, and manuscripts from Earth might acquire immense spiritual significance. New beliefs could also emerge around the voyage itself. The launch might become a moment of creation in the ship's sacred calendar. The founders could be remembered as ancestors who entered darkness so that life would continue. Maintenance work might gather spiritual meaning because the survival of every person depended upon unseen acts of care. Air, water, and cultivated soil could be treated with reverence through ceremonies that joined engineering discipline with moral obligation. A leak repaired in time might be remembered through an annual rite centuries after the original danger passed. Earth might appear within these traditions as a lost garden, a wounded mother, a distant cradle, or the first vessel built by nature. Different groups would emphasize different interpretations. One community could regard return as the ultimate hope, even when navigation made return impossible. Another might teach that humanity had completed its earthly age and must accept a new home among the stars. A third could focus on arrival, viewing the destination planet as a promised land whose meaning exceeded any scientific assessment of its surface. Disagreement would arise because origin stories influence political life. A movement that regarded Earth as the only legitimate human home might resist permanent cultural adaptation. Its members could preserve founder languages, clothing, family structures, and ceremonies with strict discipline. A ship-centered movement might argue that survival required practices shaped by present conditions. Tension between these groups could continue for generations, especially whenever leaders used sacred history to support laws governing birth, labor, education, or access to resources. Myth would grow even in a society devoted to accurate records. Children hearing that Earth once held animals larger than rooms and storms wider than nations might treat history as a realm of impossible creatures. Blue whales, redwood forests, glaciers, volcanoes, and tropical cyclones would possess the scale of legend when compared with the ship's managed environment. The archives would confirm their existence, yet emotional belief follows its own path. A perfectly documented wonder can still feel mythical when no living person has encountered anything similar. Politics aboard the ship would shape how Earth was remembered. The original mission charter might describe the vessel as a temporary community carrying the heritage of humanity toward another world. Centuries later, its institutions would have developed through crises the founders could barely imagine. Authority could belong to elected councils, technical guilds, hereditary families, artificial systems, or combinations that changed throughout the voyage. Every government would inherit the power to manage archives, schools, ceremonies, and the official interpretation of departure. Leaders might invoke Earth during periods of conflict. A reformer could appeal to ancient democratic traditions preserved in the historical record. An authoritarian government might celebrate the discipline of the launch era and present obedience as the quality that saved humanity. Competing movements could select different episodes from Earth's history, each finding ancestors who appeared to support its position. The planet would become a vast reservoir of examples, warnings, heroes, crimes, and symbols available to anyone capable of shaping the narrative. Control of the archive would therefore matter as much as control of machinery. A complete archive could contain evidence that challenged national myths, family prestige, religious authority, or the legitimacy of existing institutions. Governments might classify certain records during emergencies and fail to release them later. Technical formats could become inaccessible. Files might be damaged, deliberately altered, or copied into competing collections. Even with redundancy, preservation would require trust in the people and systems responsible for maintaining authenticity. The story of the mission's selection process could become especially dangerous. Descendants might learn that their ancestors were chosen through principles their society now considered unjust. Genetic screening, wealth, political influence, nationality, professional status, or hidden coercion might have determined who boarded. Families descended from senior founders could possess privileges established during the earliest decades. Historical research might reveal that celebrated heroes acted from ambition, fear, or self-interest. Earth's final presence in the ship's political life could revolve around arguments over guilt inherited across generations. A society facing continual survival pressures might eventually limit historical debate. Leaders could claim that excessive attention to Earth weakened unity or encouraged impossible dreams of return. Schools might reduce planetary history in favor of engineering, medicine, ecology, and civic duty. Such changes could begin during a genuine emergency, when every available hour had practical value. Once the crisis ended, the shortened curriculum might remain. Forgetting would advance through administrative decisions, each one defensible within its immediate context. The closed ecosystem would influence morality with unusual force. On Earth, many environmental consequences occurred far from the people who caused them. Waste could leave a household and disappear into systems few citizens understood. Aboard the ship, every material pathway would remain close. Water leaving a shower would travel toward treatment and future use. Carbon dioxide from human breath would enter biological and mechanical cycles. Food scraps would join processes that returned nutrients to cultivation. Survival would depend upon the reliability of these exchanges. Children would learn the ecological structure of the vessel as part of basic literacy. They might trace a meal through energy production, crop chambers, pollination, harvesting, preparation, digestion, waste processing, and nutrient recovery. The lesson would contain personal consequences. A damaged crop bed could affect menus across the entire population. Contamination in one compartment could threaten several generations of stored biological material. The inhabitants would understand that life continued through cooperation among humans, plants, microorganisms, machines, and carefully maintained chemical conditions. This knowledge could create a strong culture of stewardship. Careless consumption might carry social shame. Repair could become a respected craft, and longevity of materials could influence status. Ceremonies might accompany the recycling of rare substances or the opening of seed reserves. People could inherit tools maintained by several generations, with every repair recorded. The value of an object would include its history of service and the resources required to replace it. The same system could become oppressive when authorities linked personal behavior to collective survival. Governments might monitor water use, diet, reproduction, movement, and health with extraordinary detail. Officials could justify surveillance through ecological necessity. Some restrictions would genuinely protect the population. Others might survive after their technical purpose disappeared. Citizens would have to distinguish between essential coordination and the expansion of power, a difficult task when failure carried consequences for everyone aboard. Earth's environmental history would influence these debates. The ship's population would study how planetary societies managed forests, oceans, atmosphere, agriculture, and waste. They might view ecological collapse as the central lesson of human history, especially when the mission itself began in response to damage on Earth. The planet could become a moral warning repeated throughout education, the place where humanity possessed abundance and failed to protect it. Such a narrative might preserve Earth's importance while reducing its complexity to a single cautionary tale. Reproduction aboard a generation ship would belong to private life and collective survival at the same time. Population size would have to remain within the capacity of food production, habitat space, medical care, and genetic diversity. Births might be encouraged during some decades and delayed during others. Families could require authorization, scheduling, or participation in long-term demographic plans. These policies would shape love, partnership, parenthood, and personal freedom throughout the voyage. The founders might describe such control as temporary mission discipline. Their descendants would grow up regarding it as a normal feature of society. A person could learn from childhood that the timing of their own birth resulted from population forecasts made years earlier. Siblings might be separated by policy. Certain genetic combinations could be encouraged, while stored reproductive material from Earth introduced ancestry belonging to people who never boarded. A child might have biological grandparents who lived centuries before their conception. Family structures would adapt to these conditions. Children could be raised by extended households, professional caregivers, or community groups designed to provide stability when work schedules became demanding. Parenthood might carry formal duties toward education and ecological training. Romantic attachment could exist alongside demographic obligations that sometimes created painful conflicts. Literature aboard the ship would explore these tensions, developing stories that Earthborn audiences might find unfamiliar and descendants would recognize immediately. Genealogical knowledge would become important for health and identity. The ship could maintain detailed records extending back to the founders and to genetic archives collected on Earth. People might know the names of ancestors separated from them by 10 generations. Family trees could appear throughout public life, used for medical planning, ceremonies, inheritance, and political claims. At the same time, centuries of intermarriage would connect nearly everyone. The idea of a separate ancestral nation or ethnicity could weaken as lineages crossed repeatedly within the limited population. Biological change would proceed slowly, influenced by gravity, radiation protection, diet, medical technology, and reproductive choices. A rotating habitat might preserve conditions close to those on Earth, while lower gravity sections could shape development differently. Genetic medicine might correct harmful mutations or introduce deliberate adaptations. Future generations could possess bodies increasingly suited to the vessel. Even subtle changes would affect their sense of belonging. Earth's gravity, sunlight, microorganisms, and environment could become physically difficult for people whose ancestors had lived in controlled conditions for centuries. The human body would remember Earth longer than human culture in certain ways. Circadian rhythms, bones, muscles, vision, balance, immune responses, and reproductive biology developed within planetary conditions extending far beyond recorded history. The ship would have to imitate portions of that environment through rotation, lighting, exercise, nutrition, and medical intervention. Every artificial sunrise would acknowledge an ancient relationship between the body and the turning Earth. Over generations, the imitation could become its own standard. Lighting schedules might preserve a 24-hour day because medicine and tradition supported it. The inhabitants would speak of days and years even while moving through interstellar darkness, where the ship's motion offered no natural cycle matching those units. A year could remain linked to Earth's orbit around the Sun, serving as a historical measurement detached from direct observation. Birthdays, elections, education, and life expectancy would continue to use the rhythm of a planet left centuries behind. Eventually, practical changes might alter the calendar. Engineers could find that a different daily schedule improved energy use or work coordination. Communities living in separate habitat sections might adopt distinct cycles. A political reform could redefine the year according to mission time, rotational maintenance periods, or progress toward the destination. Traditionalists would resist because calendars organize memory. Changing the length of a day would reach into prayer, childhood, sleep, anniversaries, and the age of every citizen. Food would preserve biological and cultural traces of Earth. Crops aboard the ship would descend from plants domesticated across many regions and thousands of years. Wheat, rice, potatoes, beans, fruits, herbs, algae, fungi, and engineered varieties would carry human history within their genomes. Recipes could preserve the names of nations and landscapes after those identities had blended. A meal served during a festival might reproduce flavors associated with a distant coast, even when several ingredients had been replaced by ship-grown equivalents. Cuisine would also evolve according to resource efficiency and local taste. Some animals might exist only as genetic records or virtual models because raising them required too much space and food. Cultured tissue, microbial proteins, and engineered plants could provide textures once associated with meat or dairy products. Descendants would develop dishes that no one on Earth had prepared, combining crops selected for closed-system agriculture. Their food would become one of the clearest expressions of a culture rooted in earthly biology and transformed by life aboard the vessel. The sky would become one of the greatest divisions between the founders and their descendants. Earthborn humans had lived beneath a celestial dome shaped by atmosphere, weather, daylight, and the planet's rotation. Even people who rarely looked upward knew that the sky changed. Clouds gathered, stars appeared, the moon crossed its phases, and the sun moved through the seasons. The sky formed a constant background to human imagination, religion, navigation, art, and the measurement of time. Aboard the ship, most inhabitants might never see space directly. Windows would create structural weakness and expose interior spaces to radiation, making external views limited or heavily shielded. Observation decks could use cameras and reconstructed displays. The surrounding stars would appear almost fixed during a human lifetime, their gradual changes measured by instruments. The destination star would brighten across generations, though its apparent transformation might remain slow enough to escape casual notice. Children would learn constellations as historical patterns. The shapes familiar on Earth depended upon the solar system's position in the galaxy. As the ship traveled, nearby stars would shift against the background, gradually distorting those ancient arrangements. Orion, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, and the Southern Cross could lose their familiar geometry. Astronomers would document the changes, while artists and educators decided how long to preserve the old connecting lines. A constellation could survive as a cultural image after the stars no longer supported it. New constellations would emerge from the ship's changing viewpoint. Passengers might name them after founders, engineers, animals preserved in the archive, or events that occurred during the voyage. Each generation would add stories to the sky displayed inside observation halls. The stars would become a map of the vessel's own history. A bright grouping might commemorate a successful repair. A dark region could be associated with a period of mourning. Through these stories, deep space would become culturally inhabited. Earth's sun would eventually become one star among many. Astronomers could always identify it with precise instruments. Public displays might mark its position, and ceremonies could direct attention toward that point. To the unaided eye, it would fade into the stellar background. Children might gather to see the sun through magnification, listening as teachers explained that every human ancestor once lived close to that distant light. The statement would carry enormous scale, though its emotional effect would vary. Some would feel awe. Others would regard it as another fact from a remote age. Communication with Earth would prolong connection during the early voyage. Messages could contain news, personal recordings, scientific discoveries, art, political debate, and images of a world continuing after departure. The first passengers would wait for replies from family members and institutions they had known. As distance increased, each exchange would take longer. A question sent home might receive an answer years later, addressed to a person who had changed profoundly or already died. The delay would transform correspondence into a form of archaeology. Messages arriving from Earth would describe events that had become history by the time the ship received them. The passengers could respond, knowing that their words would reach another version of the planet. Conversations would stretch across decades, with several generations participating in a single thread. A child might answer a recording sent to her grandmother. Earth could reply to people who had been unborn when the original message left the ship. Eventually, the content of Earth's transmissions might become difficult to interpret. Languages would evolve on both sides. Political boundaries, institutions, technologies, and cultural references could change. Automated translation would help, yet context would require deeper study. The ship's population might receive art built upon experiences unavailable aboard. Earth audiences could find the descendants equally strange, shaped by centuries of confinement, resource discipline, and shared ancestry. The emotional balance of communication would also shift. During the first decades, the ship would feel like the distant community. Centuries later, its inhabitants might regard Earth as an external society whose choices no longer determined their lives. News from the planet could become a specialized interest followed by historians and enthusiasts. Most citizens would focus on local work, relationships, disputes, and celebrations. A major event on Earth might arrive with great historical significance and little immediate effect aboard. Silence could come without warning. A technical failure, political decision, disaster, or gradual decline in interest might end transmissions. The ship would continue sending messages for years, uncertain whether anyone remained able or willing to answer. Each cycle of silence would generate theories. Some citizens would assume that Earth had suffered catastrophe. Others would believe that communications had changed beyond the vessel's ability to detect them. With no confirmation, the ancestral planet would move further from history and closer to mystery. The archive would represent the largest deliberate memory ever carried by a human community. It might contain literature, music, film, scientific knowledge, languages, legal systems, artworks, ecological records, personal testimonies, and detailed models of the planet. Redundant copies would be stored across separate sections. Some material could be encoded in durable physical forms, protected from software failure. Librarians, engineers, historians, and artificial systems would share responsibility for keeping the collection accessible. Preserving data for centuries requires continuous work. Storage media degrade, formats become obsolete, catalogs accumulate errors, translations drift. A file copied perfectly can become useless when the knowledge required to interpret it disappears. Every generation would migrate information into new systems, verify authenticity, repair damaged sections, and decide how much redundancy remained affordable. The archive would survive through a chain of human choices extending far beyond the lifespan of its creators. Quantity itself would create a problem. No society can give equal attention to every preserved work. Billions of documents could exist inside the database while remaining unseen for generations. Popular collections would receive frequent maintenance and translation. Obscure material might become technically available and culturally invisible. An ancient song could remain stored in flawless resolution even after nobody remembered the language, instruments, or circumstances that once gave it meaning. Curators would shape memory through selection. During periods of limited capacity, they might preserve scientific and technical information first, followed by medicine, agriculture, engineering, history, and major works of art. Personal records could receive lower priority. The recorded voice of an unknown child, the diary of an ordinary worker, or footage from a family gathering might disappear while formal institutions survived. Earth would become increasingly represented through the material considered important by successive custodians. Artificial intelligence could assist by maintaining context, teaching languages, and generating immersive reconstructions. It might answer questions in the style of Earthborn experts, or create interactive figures based on recorded individuals. Descendants could speak with simulations of founders assembled from interviews, correspondence, and behavioral data. These encounters might feel intimate, educational, and unsettling. The simulated founder would continue adapting to new users, gradually becoming a cultural descendant of the original person while claiming to represent the past. A major disaster could accelerate forgetting within a single generation. Fire, radiation, collision, sabotage, software corruption, or structural failure might destroy sections of the archive. The crew would prioritize life support, navigation, medicine, and propulsion during recovery. Cultural records could be lost because the systems preserving them consumed power needed elsewhere. Survivors might save only a fraction of what the ship had carried. The resulting gaps would attract stories. People would remember that an immense collection once existed, though few could describe its contents. Fragments might circulate without clear origin. A damaged film could become the sole visual record of a city. A partial map might omit entire regions. Historical figures could survive through references in works whose primary context had vanished. Future scholars would reconstruct Earth from evidence shaped by chance. Loss could also result from deliberate destruction. A revolutionary movement might erase records associated with an old regime. Religious authorities could suppress material considered dangerous. A government facing division might remove histories that encouraged separate identities among the population. Each act of censorship would claim a purpose in the present. Across centuries, several periods of selective removal could transform the archive far beyond the intentions of any single group. Oral tradition would preserve elements that formal systems lost. Families might continue singing songs whose language had become obscure. Maintenance crews could repeat sayings traced to the founders. A story about a woman crossing an ocean might survive after records of the ocean itself became incomplete. Oral memory would reshape details through performance, making the past responsive to each audience. Accuracy would weaken in some areas while emotional continuity remained strong. The ship's inhabitants might eventually discover forgotten storage during repairs. An isolated server, sealed compartment, or physical library could reveal material unseen for centuries. The discovery would create excitement and conflict. Historians would rush to authenticate it. Political groups would search for evidence supporting their claims. Ordinary citizens would encounter voices from Earth with unexpected clarity. For a time, the ancestral world could return to public attention, carrying images and ideas capable of unsettling the society that had grown without them. Art would reveal how deeply the ship had moved beyond Earth. The first generation would paint landscapes from memory, write songs about departure, and record the grief of distance. Their work would contain recognizable rivers, streets, skies, animals, and seasons. Audiences would share the references because many had lived among them. Early art would preserve the emotional texture of exile. Later artists would inherit those images and transform them. A poet born 2 centuries into the voyage might use ocean as a symbol for immeasurable distance, even after seeing water only in tanks and simulation chambers. A composer could weave the rhythm of pumps into a traditional melody recorded before launch. Sculptors might work with recycled structural material carrying traces of old machinery. Their art would join ancestral symbols with the physical language of the vessel. New genres would arise from experiences unique to the journey. Performances could unfold across rotating spaces where gravity changed with distance from the axis. Music might incorporate mechanical resonance and communication delays between distant habitat sections. Visual art could use radiation data, stellar motion, crop cycles, or the genealogy of recycled materials. Audiences would understand references that no Earthborn culture had developed. Humor would change as well. Jokes often depend upon shared inconvenience, taboo, and expectation. The inhabitants would joke about airlock procedures, population schedules, maintenance failures, recycled food, council meetings, and the endless optimism of mission announcements. Earth customs could become a source of absurdity. Comedy might portray ancestors stepping into uncontrolled weather, keeping dangerous animals inside their homes, or traveling across cities for work that could have been performed remotely. Some artists would resist the cultural distance. They might devote their lives to recovering ancient earth forms, reconstructing lost instruments, dances, languages, and dramatic traditions. Their work could attract admiration and accusations of nostalgia. Others would argue that the ship deserved an art faithful to its own existence. The dispute would concern more than style. It would ask whether the traveling population remained a branch of Earth's civilization or had become a civilization whose origin happened to lie there. The mission's destination would gradually influence memory of Earth. During the early voyage, the target planet might exist as data: mass, orbit, atmosphere, temperature, gravity, chemical composition, and uncertain signs of water. Telescopes aboard the ship would gather better observations as distance decreased. Each generation would know more than the one before. Maps would develop from faint measurements into detailed models. The destination would acquire place names before any human reached its surface. Children would grow up studying two planets. Earth would be the world of origin, represented through history and archive. The destination would be the world of their future, represented through expectation. One receded into the past while the other gained physical presence. At some point, the target star would become the brightest object in the sky. Later instruments might resolve weather, continents, clouds, and seasonal changes. The new world would begin exerting emotional gravity. This shift could produce conflict. Some inhabitants would see landing as the fulfillment of every sacrifice made during the voyage. Others might fear a planet they had never evolved to inhabit. The ship would offer controlled air, known microorganisms, stable temperature, familiar food, and generations of social order. A natural world would contain uncertainty at every scale: winds, soil chemistry, native life, radiation, weather, and gravity could threaten bodies adapted to the vessel. A movement might argue for remaining aboard permanently. The ship would have become home through centuries of habitation, repair, birth, and burial. Every corridor would hold memory. Its ecosystem would carry organisms shaped alongside the human population. Landing could expose this community to hazards and divide it across settlements. The destination, once imagined as salvation, might appear as a demand imposed by ancestors who never experienced life aboard. Earth would enter the argument in unexpected ways. Supporters of settlement could claim that humanity belonged on planets, and that the voyage aimed to restore a life under open sky. Opponents might answer that Earth demonstrated how dangerous uncontrolled ecosystems and planetary politics could become. Both sides would use the same ancestral world to support different futures. The question of landing would reveal how completely Earth's meaning had fractured. Centuries of funerals would alter the emotional geography of the ship. The founders might request that their ashes be preserved for release on the destination planet. Their children could follow the same custom, treating burial elsewhere as a promise that connected death to arrival. Storage chambers would gradually fill with memorial containers, each labeled with a name, a life, and a place on Earth remembered by the deceased. Later generations might prefer burial within the ship's ecological cycle. Organic material could return to processes that supported crops, microorganisms, and future inhabitants. Such a practice would carry practical and spiritual meaning. The dead would remain within the closed world, contributing physically to lives that followed. Memorial gardens might contain nutrients drawn from thousands of ancestors, giving the phrase ancestral soil a direct reality. The destination burial tradition could continue as a ceremonial obligation long after its emotional basis weakened. People might ask why so much material remained stored when resources were limited. Families could resist any attempt to change the arrangement. A crisis might force the community to process remains intended for another world, creating grief and political outrage. The decision would expose the tension between promises made to the dead and duties toward the living. Earth itself would become a planet of the dead. Every founder's parents, friends, and ancestors remained there. As generations passed, the number of personal connections would decline, yet the scale of burial would expand in imagination. Billions of human lives had ended beneath its soil, within its oceans, and through its atmosphere. Descendants might regard Earth as the largest memorial in existence, a world layered with remains, ruins, names, and forgotten experiences. This association could make Earth sacred and distant at once. Returning there, even if physically possible, might feel like entering a tomb. Pilgrimage toward the solar system could attract dreamers many centuries after departure. They might seek the birthplace of humanity, hoping to walk among landscapes known from archive. Others would find the desire incomprehensible. Their ancestors had crossed darkness to build a future elsewhere, and reversing that direction would seem like surrendering the purpose of the voyage. Identity aboard the ship would become increasingly local. People might introduce themselves through habitat district, profession, family network, or membership in a technical community. Someone could come from the agricultural ring, the forward workshops, the medical quarter, or a settlement established after a major reconstruction. These places would hold childhood memories and social meaning. Earthly nations would survive in names, recipes, archives, and ceremonies while losing much of their political force. Some families would work deliberately to preserve a distinct heritage. They might maintain a language, celebrate regional festivals, prepare traditional food, and teach stories connected to a particular part of Earth. Success would depend upon continuity, intermarriage, available teachers, and the willingness of young people to participate. After many generations, the tradition could remain vibrant while evolving into a form no community on Earth would fully recognize. Other identities would merge. A festival might combine music from several continents with a ceremony developed during the voyage. Languages could exchange vocabulary until a new common speech emerged. Clothing designed for the ship's climate might carry patterns derived from ancient cultures. The inhabitants would inherit the whole human archive, giving them freedom to create combinations that earlier societies rarely encountered. Arguments over authenticity would continue. Some citizens might accuse others of using Earth traditions without sufficient understanding. Historians could challenge ceremonies presented as ancient when much of their form developed aboard. Communities would debate who had the right to speak for cultures whose original populations remained far behind. These disputes would show that Earth had retained emotional power even as direct continuity became harder to establish. Eventually, the population might use a collective name unrelated to Earth. The ship's name could become the name of its people. A child might say, "I am from Meridian," referring to the vessel as birthplace, society, and world. Human would remain the wider biological identity. Earthborn would describe the founders and perhaps the people still living in the solar system. The new term would express a reality that had developed gradually. Humanity now possessed histories separated by interstellar distance. Forgetting can occur through comfort as easily as through disaster. A stable ship with thriving gardens, meaningful work, art, education, and strong relationships would give its inhabitants full lives. Most people would have little reason to spend each day mourning a distant planet. They would fall in love, raise children, argue with neighbors, pursue ambitions, and complain about local inconveniences. Their emotional world would center upon the people and places they could reach. Earth anniversaries might continue through institutional habit. Citizens would gather for Departure Day, watch footage of the launch, and hear speeches about the courage of the founders. Children could enjoy the celebration while paying limited attention to its history. Food, music, games, and public holidays often outlived the beliefs that created them. The ceremony would remain valuable because it belonged to the community's calendar, even when Earth itself occupied little space in private thought. A person who became intensely interested in Earth might appear eccentric. They could study extinct languages, collect ancient household objects, or spend hours inside planetary simulations. Friends might respect the passion while failing to share it. The scholar's longing would resemble fascination with a historical civilization, strengthened by the knowledge that every human lineage began there. Earth studies could develop into a specialized profession with conferences, disputes, and discoveries far removed from everyday life. Tourism through virtual Earth might become popular while historical understanding weakened. People could visit idealized beaches, forests, mountains, or cities selected for beauty. Commercial simulations might remove discomfort, danger, poverty, insects, disease, and difficult weather. The resulting planet would feel pleasurable and emotionally vivid. It would also reflect the desires of shipborne customers more closely than the complex world inhabited by their ancestors. Through such experiences, Earth could become a fantasy of unlimited space and natural abundance. Citizens tired of regulation might dream of rivers without quotas and landscapes without access schedules. Political movements could promise that the destination planet would provide this freedom. Historians would warn that planetary life included scarcity, disaster, labor, and conflict. The imagined Earth would remain powerful precisely because no living witness could interrupt the dream with ordinary reality. Could a human society intentionally preserve an authentic relationship with Earth for 1,000 years? The effort would require more than reliable storage. Each generation would need encounters that made the planet relevant to present life. Education, ritual, art, family stories, scientific study, and sensory reconstruction would all contribute. No single institution could carry the task indefinitely. Memory would have to remain distributed across the culture. Preservation would also require acceptance of change. Forcing descendants to repeat the emotions of the founders would create resentment and hollow ceremony. A child born 8 centuries after launch could honor Earth without experiencing the grief of departure. Their connection might be intellectual, spiritual, artistic, biological, or ethical. It would differ from the connection held by a passenger who remembered standing on the planet. The difference would reflect the passage of time rather than failure. The most durable legacy of Earth might lie within principles developed from its history. Descendants could preserve the value of ecological diversity, freedom of thought, compassion across generations, scientific curiosity, and caution toward concentrated power. These ideas would continue shaping decisions aboard the ship, even when the places and events that formed them became remote. A civilization remembers its origin partly through the habits it carries forward. The ship itself would contain Earth at every level. Its metals came from planetary mines or from industries first developed there. Its plants, microorganisms, and human bodies belong to lineages formed within Earth's biosphere. Mathematics, language, engineering, music, medicine, and law emerged from countless generations beneath the sun. Even a society that stopped speaking the planet's name would continue living through structures inherited from it. Complete forgetting would therefore remain impossible in a biological and historical sense. Conscious memory could fade, archives could fail, and myths could replace accurate accounts. The descendants would still breathe oxygen released through processes rooted in earthly life. Their cells would carry an evolutionary history written by oceans, forests, climate, predation, disease, cooperation, and time. Earth would persist inside them as an origin embedded deeper than recollection. When the destination finally filled the observation screens, the inhabitants would face a world no human had touched. Clouds might move across continents under the light of another star. Oceans could reflect colors shaped by a different atmosphere. Mountain ranges would cast unfamiliar shadows. For the first time in centuries, the population would stand close to a natural environment, large enough to exceed every chamber, model, and simulation they had known. The oldest passengers would have spent their entire lives awaiting this view. Children would grow up knowing that landing could occur during their adulthood. Every conversation about Earth would gain new tension because another planet had become immediate. Teachers might compare the two worlds through data and imagery. Artists would imagine the first step, the first unfiltered wind, and the first night beneath an open sky. Medical teams would prepare bodies that had never encountered natural weather or an uncontrolled ecosystem. The first person to descend would carry Earth through ancestry and the ship through experience. Their suit, language, tools, and mission would emerge from a chain beginning on the ancestral planet and continuing through every generation of the voyage. When their foot touched the surface, they might repeat words spoken during earlier explorations. They might choose a new statement belonging entirely to their own culture. The moment would connect several worlds without making them identical. Those born later on the destination planet would regard the ship differently. It would remain visible in orbit or rest as a vast structure on the surface. Their grandparents would describe corridors, rotating habitats, and the constant sound of machinery. Children raised beneath a real sky might struggle to imagine living inside metal for an entire lifetime. Within a few generations, the vessel could become their ancestral world, remembered through the same mixture of knowledge and distance once applied to Earth. Memory would begin another transformation. Earth would become the origin of humanity. The ship would become the origin of their society. The destination would become the ground beneath their feet. Stories would pass through all three places, with each generation placing emotional weight where its own life unfolded. Descendants might preserve Earth more carefully after understanding what it meant to inherit a planet through stories. They might also let it recede, absorbed into a longer history of migration. One evening, centuries after landing, a child might stand beside a river under an unfamiliar constellation. The air would move through grasses adapted from earthly species and organisms discovered on the new planet. Behind the child, a settlement would glow along the valley. Above, the old generation ship might cross the sky as a moving point of light, preserved as a museum, station, or memorial. An adult could explain that their ancestors once lived on another world orbiting a distant star. The child would have seen Earth in school. They would know its blue oceans, its single moon, its extinct cities, and the path followed by the ship. The facts might seem extraordinary and remote. When asked whether they wished to visit, the child could hesitate, looking toward the river and the familiar mountains around them. Earth would still exist somewhere beyond the visible sky, perhaps inhabited, perhaps silent, perhaps transformed beyond recognition. Its light would travel across the distance, carrying an image of the planet from years earlier. The child might search for the sun through an observatory and see only a faint point. Within that point lay every ocean crossed by ancient sailors, every city razed and abandoned, every language spoken, every war, every birth, and every dream that contributed to the departure. The child might feel pride, curiosity, sorrow, or almost nothing. Memory cannot command emotion across centuries. Each person receives the past and forms a private relationship with it. The absence of longing would carry no betrayal. Home grows from repeated life. The voices heard each morning, the paths known by the body, the graves of loved ones, the local weather, and the expectation of tomorrow. Humanity could forget the experience of Earth while preserving its record. It could lose the sound of rain on an old roof, the intuitive scale of an ocean, and the comfort once found beneath familiar stars. Those losses would unfold quietly across generations, carried by ordinary lives rather than a single moment of erasure. The ancestral planet would move from memory into history, from history into legend, and from legend into the hidden foundations of a new civilization. Yet every child born beneath another sun would remain part of a story that began in Earth's water. Every breath would descend from an atmosphere shaped by ancient life. Every human hand would carry the form of creatures that climbed, grasped, built, painted, repaired, and reached outward from one small planet. Earth could vanish from daily conversation and continue speaking through the human body. Perhaps this is how worlds are truly remembered. Their landscapes fade from personal memory. Their names change. Their stories gather errors and symbols. Their descendants travel so far that the original sky becomes impossible to recognize. Still, something crosses the distance, a way of caring for the living, a question preserved in language, a seed carried through darkness, or the decision to protect people who will be born long after the decision-maker has died. The passengers would leave Earth once. Their descendants would leave it many times through language, custom, biology, politics, and imagination. Each departure would carry part of the planet forward. Centuries later, humanity might no longer think of itself as exiled. It would have learned to belong to the vessel, to the journey, and eventually to another world. Earth would become distant enough to resemble a dream. The dream would remain inside everything humanity had become.